Welcome to the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival. Today, Series 3 of Showcasing Innovation in Greater Bendigo. I'm Jonathan Ridnell. In this conversation, we're sharing the success stories of 3 Bendigo-based businesses and hopefully inspiring you by their stories of innovation and invention. Before we get underway though, I'd like to acknowledge that the Bendigo Innovation and Invention Festival is coming to you from Bendigo in Victoria, Australia, and we're meeting on Dja Dja Wurrung land. I'd like to pay respects to the traditional owners who are the first scientists, technologists and innovators who for thousands of years have been stewards of their culture and land. I'd like to particularly pay respect to elders past, present and emerging. This session is made possible by our contributors, Bendigo Health, MSD Animal Health and AMC Consultants. Please welcome to our panel Peter McCarthy from AMC Consultants. Thank you, Peter. Our second Peter Faulkner, CEO of Bendigo Health.
Pleasure to be here.
And Glenn Morrison, Director, Business Systems and Process Improvement at MSD Animal Health. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Now, rather than read out your biographies, I'd rather get them in your words. Can you perhaps introduce yourselves and the organisations you've been chosen to be a part of? Peter Faulkner, commissioning brand new hospitals seems to be a habit for you. Started with Casey Hospital, you've been to the Middle East to commission a university hospital, and most recently were part of the almost $1 billion building and commissioning of Bendigo Health. What is it about the challenge that keeps you coming back, Peter?
Well, I think, Jonathan, it's largely a combination of wrong place, wrong time and sort of dumb luck, I think. I think I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to, in fact, commission a number of hospitals and also in the context of Bendigo to then go on to have the privilege of being the chief executive of the hospital. And the Bendigo one, I guess, is a culmination of a decade or more of work, and it is in the context of the Invention and Innovation Festival. It is one of Australia's most technologically enabled hospitals. So it's also a privilege, but a great challenge to try and leverage that technology and extract innovation in the health system.
And what is it in your career that you think has brought you to the apex where you have been asked to be part of these commissioning teams?
Oh, I think I've been very fortunate in having quite a broad experience base. I started as a clinician, started as a nurse, and moved into a range of management roles, clinical management, and then more generic management, both in government and non-government sectors. So I think it's been really that very broad range, coming up from the shop floor, so to speak, right through the system to have the opportunity to commission hospitals. And hospitals by their nature are quite complex and challenging facilities, much less complex human systems when they're operating. And I suppose it does perhaps just suggest that I do relish the challenge of a bit of complexity and not having it just too easy.
Yeah, definitely not having it too easy indeed. There's a second Peter on our panel today, Peter McCarthy from AMC. Now, you may not be familiar with this organisation, but you'll know some of the companies that Peter and AMC have been involved with. They include Bendigo Mining, Castlemaine Goldfields, and to be honest with Peter, it's also gold in his system in retirement. He sits on the board of Sovereign Hill Museum in Ballarat. So Peter, what is it about mineral extraction that's kept you so passionate for a lifetime?
Yes, it has been a lifetime. I find a number of challenges there that are really interesting and rewarding when you get them right. It's exploration in the old-fashioned sense of looking and finding things and turning empty fields, if you like, into thriving industries and creating employment. And I've been fortunate enough to have the chance to do that a number of times as part of a team. No one person does it, but certainly as part of a team, I've had that experience and it's been great. And you get to do it all around the world as well, so that's fun.
It certainly is. And one common theme that I'm seeing through so many of the people we're meeting in this series is that the managers and CEOs have at some stage in their career got their hands dirty. At the beginning of your career, were you a bit more hands-on than you are now as a mining consultant?
That's certainly true. I left school at 17 and went down the mine straight away. And I spent 10 years as a miner, a mine surveyor and a trainee engineer, and eventually through night classes I became a mining engineer. So it was the best grounding you could possibly have for the career that I ended up following.
And now as a consultant, do you find that empathy with what it is like to be down in the humidity and the heat is an important thing to know about?
Yes, it's not always hot and humid. The climate control is often quite good these days, but the experience of it is invaluable, and being able to talk to people as somebody who knows what it's about is really important.
Fantastic, thank you. And not too many people in Bendigo know that inside a pretty innocuous building in the East Bendigo Industrial Park, there's an international animal pharmaceutical company. It's called MSD Animal Health. Glenn Morrison, who works there, could you perhaps enlighten us to what happens inside those buildings and where it fits into that global network of animal health?
Yeah, sure. And as we sort of talk about that in Bendigo, it is quite common that not many people know about MSD Animal Health. We're really fortunate in Bendigo to have really one of the largest animal health companies in the world are based here out of one of the 3 manufacturing sites in Asia Pacific region, and one of them is in Bendigo in our backyard. It's a bacterial and viral vaccine manufacturing building, and it's a site that has over 130 people on site. It also has its own R&D, has all the supporting functions within that, but it's also at the cutting edge in relation to what we're trying to do is to really add value and central value to our customer base out in regional and central Australia.
So Glenn, what's your career path that's brought you to work here in Bendigo?
Yeah, again, I like hearing the other Peter story. I worked in operations, so I've worked in the manufacturing side within MSD for nearly 18 years, coming up to 19 years, I think. So certainly getting the hands dirty early on, to now working moving up then through to a regional role within Asia Pacific, and now into a global role with business systems and process improvement, which is about how do we really innovate and continue to use innovation in our systems to really add more central value to our manufacturing divisions within MSD Animal Health.
Fantastic, thank you, Glenn. I'm smiling because normally I try so hard to get things in common within a panel, and Glenn and Peter Faulkner, animal health, human health, that makes sense. Mining, Peter McCarthy, I'm not quite sure where vaccines and Internet of Things for wearables fits with you. But can I start with you though, because mining has been central to the development of Bendigo over more than 150 years now, and mining, I hope, has become more efficient, safer, friendlier to the environment. So perhaps can you give me an example of a story of mining in Bendigo that really tells that last 120 years or more of innovation to get to where we are today?
Yes, I would like Jonathan to talk about Fosterville Gold Mine. I know that will be dealt with elsewhere in this series, but that may not talk about the history of it, and I was involved early on and know some of the early history. Fosterville was mined back in the 19th century and produced, I think, 22,000 ounces of gold, and then was left for many years. Nothing happened. People looked at it and said it's too small, it's not interesting. But a friend of mine, David Wright, studied at the Bendigo CAE, did metallurgy, and learned about a new process called carbon in pulp processing, leaching. And he introduced that at Fosterville originally to treat the old tailings dumps. And David went on then to treat dumps around Bendigo, cleaned a lot of the big old dumps up at Bendigo, did that also elsewhere in Victoria. And then developed an open pit mine. And to do that, he introduced a process called heap leaching, which was not entirely new to Victoria. There was a mine at Ngambie doing the same thing. But again, it was an innovation. It was something, a bit of lateral thinking, to turn a potential resource into an operation.
Peter, can you paint a word picture of what heap leaching looks like on the ground?
Yes, in the case of Fosterville, it involved picking up, drilling and blasting the rock firstly, breaking it up, crushing and breaking it up small enough. But instead of putting it then through a plant, it was piled up in heaps, and then a solution placed over the top of that, sprayed over it to dissolve the gold, and then the gold was extracted from it. So it's used because it's very cheap, and it pays for, gold will pay for it when you can't afford to do other sorts of processing. That worked at Ngambie, and it worked. The people at Ngambie then ultimately assessed Fosterville and bought the mine and applied that same process that they were using. So it worked there again. And then once that oxide ore was mined out after 10 years or so, they realised that to treat the sulphide ore, the deeper ore, they would need to use another process. And again, that was a challenge because that ore needed a process of biological leaching, which uses bacteria. And this, I think, was only the third time in Australia that it had been done. They spent $80 million. They got it working successfully. And after a lot of work by the operators there, it wasn't easy. It eventually became more successful. They invested more money in it. And today we have a mine producing more than $1.5 billion worth of gold. So that's a fantastic innovation story in my books.
So in some ways, we've been talking about 3 or 4 different steps of innovation to go from good old-fashioned dig a hole in the ground and extract the gold right through to using sophisticated systems that use everything from biology to mineralogy.
That's right. And modern mining is very exciting because it involves robotics and advanced computer modelling and all sorts of things, and that's one of the excitements of working in that part of the industry.
Now, the other theme of the 10th anniversary of the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival is optimism. And I would imagine that along this way with those innovations would come different degrees of optimism because the mine changed hands several times in the last 20 or 30 years. And I suppose that, right now is it Kirkland who are now the proud owners of that mine.
Kirkland Lake, that's right. There were people at every stage who were optimists, who could see the potential of it, even though other people perhaps could not. And they just persevered and they pushed on. And that's technical people who are trying to solve the technical issues. There are people talking to the community and to government as well, trying to get the things permitted. And they're the financiers as well. They have to take the risk. They go out and persuade investors to put the money in. If you need $80 million, where do you get it? 1 or 2 people in the case of Fosterville were the people who backed it and who actually arranged for that finance to be possible.
Okay, so that is quite a blend of knowing the technology and also knowing how to do the pitch. And as I mentioned in the introduction as well, you don't go and mine like you did in the 1850s. And I suppose that what I'm interested in with your association with Sovereign Hill is whether or not there's a public perception that not much has changed in gold mining since those days of the digger and the cradle and call it the environmental impact that was quite severe 150 years ago.
I'm afraid that is the public perception to a large extent, and it's no longer true, of course. There's a large gold mine operating under Sovereign Hill today, 50-tonne trucks and so on, the same as Fosterville. And I was involved in the origins of that mine as well. So these days, our safety record is, if you look at a ranking of the various industries and activities in Australia, mining is one of the safer ones. I think you get to number 5 or 6 down the list of industries, broad industry areas, before mining comes into the list in terms of going from the most risky, if you like, to the least risky. So mining has really cleaned its act up in the last 20 years or 30 years.
And it's been quite extraordinary, some of the innovations. So another part of this festival has been a conversation with the Australian Turntable Company and the way in which they've again decreased risk of heavy machinery by creating turntables. So big trucks in mining don't have to do 3-point or 7 or 8 or 9-point turns to turn around in a confined space.
Yes, and I did some work for them through AMC Consultants some years ago, and we were looking at the opportunities to do that, and I'm very pleased that that's been going ahead.
Okay, so now, crystal ball in your hand, what do you think will be the next innovation that will help Fosterville and that area north of Bendigo develop as a goldfield?
I think the thing that's changing is we're going to get smaller robotic type machines, and you'll be able to follow narrow seams of narrow veins, if you like, or narrow seams, and be more selective, so that instead of producing large spoil heaps on the surface, we'll be able to take out just the valuable material and leave the rest behind. I think that's very close to coming now. I'm involved through, I'm on an advisory committee with the CSIRO, and we're looking at these sorts of technologies, and it's getting closer and closer.
That's extraordinary. In my mind, but the circle's turned back to, instead of sending human beings down these tiny, tiny cracks and shafts like we did in the 1850s and 60s, we're sending robots instead, but getting that same idea of just follow the gold, follow the quartz, or follow the seam.
Yes, when I started my career as a mine surveyor, I carried a theodolite and a tape measure. These days, you can survey a mine with a drone. You just send the drone down the hole. It flies around and scans the whole mine and produces a three-dimensional plan. It's as easy as that.
Well, you've just reminded me too that another innovation that we've seen is that cooperation between mining companies and places like government. And how important has that innovation of some of those electronic surveys that we've seen, aeroplanes and helicopters flying over the goldfields? How important are they to the future of innovation in our goldfields?
It's very important, and the Victorian government has done a great job over the years in phases, not all at once, but in surveying Victoria and pointing the way so that people can come in and explore and find these new discoveries. So that's going to happen. And people are spending the money now and following up on a lot of things that have come out of those surveys.
And when you go bush, do you still carry a geologist's hammer in your back pocket?
I do go bush quite a bit, and I do get around the old goldfields. I don't carry a metal detector. No, I find that a bit too hard. But I do like to look at the rocks, yes.
Fantastic. Peter, thank you for sharing some of the stories of innovation in our goldfields. Glenn Morrison from MSD Animal Health, if I can talk to you now. Innovative ideas must be so critical because your job is to keep one step ahead of disease in both our livestock and domestic pets.
It is. It's certainly one of the big challenges that we try and really try and invest heavily in. Obviously, we create a lot of vaccines in relation to known diseases, but it's also about what is ever changing in the market of animal health. You know, what are the new diseases, the new and sneaky ways of making sure our animals are kept healthy, and how do we partner with farms, veterinary producers, animal producers to really make sure that we can do that, and then matching that with the technology that we have available in our manufacturing sites. Can we manufacture what we need to do? Can we manufacture safer, better, more stringent vaccines in relation to the health of our animals and for even the health of our people administering our medicine? So it's certainly a driving force for what we try and do.
In some ways, we're learning more about it with the COVID pandemic, is that that relationship between good animal health and potential diseases in human beings from animals is suddenly front of mind, isn't it? Has that been part of the thinking of your organisation forever?
Yeah, I think so. It is part of the DNA. I mean, we talk about one of our certainly our culture is the science of healthier animals. So we understand the link. Healthy animals are critical to what we need to maintain. And in a pandemic, nothing's more important than that. Whether it be an animal health pandemic or a human pandemic, you know, we have people. You know, the COVID situation we find ourselves in at the moment is critical for our business. You know, we have to protect our people first and foremost, but then we have to meet the expectations of our commercial needs and the expectations of our manufacturing sites and our manufacturing network around the world, as well as our suppliers that provide us materials that we need to be able to have. It's changing the way we work incredibly. So it's not good to say we're used to being in a pandemic, but we've certainly had experience in it. And I think it does drive the way that we think, which is really the science for healthier animals.
And Glenn, the Bendigo plant is no stranger to innovation. Can you tell the story of that cattle vaccine that's been developed from go to woe here in central Victoria?
Yeah, one of the things we're really proud of, and to show the strength of our commitment to our community, is working with local farmers or local disease experts in relation to what they're seeing out in the marketplace. And one of the largest selling cattle vaccines that we have, Bibillus MHIVR, is R&D, was isolated, the disease was isolated in the Bendigo facility. Its manufacturing is done fully within Bendigo, and it's now one of our largest selling cattle vaccines. It's a significant learning story. The R&D scientist is still with us. We've had the same site director here for 33 years. So when you talk about vaccine manufacturing, whether it be in a coffee urn to now what we see in our state-of-the-art biological suite, it's incredible the change that we've seen. And being able to develop those vaccines, such as the cattle vaccine, is significant for us and something we're very proud of.
And how do you encourage a culture of innovation in an area like making vaccines for animal health? Because I'd imagine that there's no such thing as a dumb idea.
There's no such thing as a dumb idea. So we have a lot of programs internally where we continually look for new ideas. Now, whether that be the way that we manufacture, the way that we test, the materials that we source, everything is really something that we always try and look at, and we try and promote heavily into different ways of working. And the benefits are significant. They can be in reducing a vaccine's lead time. You know, our vaccines lead times can be anything over 3, 6, 12 months. So, you know, the faster we can innovate, the faster we can use technology, the shorter we can get that. It means it gets in our hands of our customers a lot faster, and it makes a difference to how we work and also how we innovate new ideas in relation to working with our commercial partners to work out what do our farmers want, what do our farmers need, what are they looking for, and changing the way that we work. It's not just about products. It's about, you know, what is the platform that we're looking to do? How do we partner with our partners in Hazeldenes, or how do we partner with our cattle producers to really try and say it's more than just a product. It's about how do we innovate across the board to add value to them and to also make it easier for us.
Now, one of the conversation pieces at the Invention and Innovation Festival and nationally at the moment is that idea of we've lost so much manufacturing capacity, we need to bring it back. In the field of making animal vaccines, how much can you say, well, we're holding up our end of the stick, we are world leaders, and our actual product is sought around the world?
Absolutely. I think one of the really good statistics we use in Bendigo is I think 50% of all the dog vaccine that's sold within Australia is manufactured out of the Bendigo facility, which not many people would know. We've just invested well in excess of, I think, $7 million in relation to expanding our production capacity to really add value to that growing demand that's there. We're part of, as I said, one of the largest animal health companies in the world, where we have a network of 26 manufacturing sites, and our capital investment is in excess of $2 billion this year. So we are adding significant capacity into our network, which is really exciting. But in a pandemic such as this, it also brings us challenges where a lot of that face-to-face work is now virtual. So but certainly the expansion is something that we're very proud of, and we continue to invest in it.
Well, people are watching you at the Bendigo Invention and Innovation Festival on screen. It's a fully virtual conference, and so it's lovely that you joined together to join us about innovation today. And Glenn, finally, that idea that the world is looking at the COVID pandemic, but in your industry, there's been a pandemic that's been running for a couple of years now, and that's the swine flu pandemic. What role does your organisation have in trying very hard to ensure that Australia is ready for if and when that particular disease enters our pig herds?
Yeah, so MSD internationally is one of the largest vaccine providers within the world. So, and its resources are extensive. And certainly no stone is being left unturned in relation to how do we help our customer base, how do we help our own internal staff prepare for such an event. We're confident that we've got the resources and the capability within ourselves to be able to do that. And as I said, we've gone through pandemics before. We've had animal health crises before. And one thing that we're really proud of is how we react. We are getting very good at this, at what we do in relation to how we get our people sorted. So even in relation to COVID to this point, how do we maintain our safety of our people? How do we maintain the continuous way of working? How do we transition a huge workforce around the world to a virtual environment, basically, to protect the manufacturing sites, to protect the way that we interact with our customers on farm? It's very significant, and there's global teams working on that. So one thing I am certain of, and I do back heavily, and I know I've been with the company for 20 years, is our ability to react and our ability to keep that customer front of mind.
It's not meant to be funny, Glenn, but in your industry, I'm sure there are labs where PPE, personal protective equipment, is mandatory in all sorts of ways to keep the virus or the bacteria away from human contact. It must feel a bit odd that now that has to sweep through not just your labs, but your marketing teams, your admin teams, your whoever teams. It must be quite strange to see those processes having to come out into your entire workforce.
Yeah, I think a number of our staff have got an empathy now for a lot of our bacterial workers that work in the full suits and the grade A suites that we have on site, where they are very much gowned up fully. So now seeing some of our office-based staff having to sort of live a little bit of that, I think there's a little bit more empathy for our teams that work in our manufacturing sites, that's for sure.
Okay, innovation and optimism is what we are exploring during the festival this year. But on the other side, I guess there must be a little bit of pessimism as well. How much effort do you have to go into to actually identify disease outbreaks before they actually happen, so you can stay ahead of that animal health curve?
Years and years is the short answer. It takes a significant amount of time and significant commitment. You're going to fail. We fail more than we succeed. So, and that's certainly something that you have to have a mindset of. You're going to hit roadblocks. There's going to be challenges. Things just simply don't work. You do have to have the end state in mind. You have to work with your stakeholders. You have to work with your customers, and you work as a team. And it may be the expert isn't in Australia. The expert may be in the Netherlands, may be in America. The power that MSD has is it's a global network. So occasionally you're going to hit challenges, but it takes extensive periods of time to really isolate those diseases, to work through a solution that's viable and can be scalable.
Glenn, I'm glad you mentioned that F word, failure, because failure of itself is not a bad thing, is it? It's how your organisation and how your team responds to failure that is critical.
Exactly. We fail, well, sometimes, but we learn from it, and that's okay. A lot of people are scared to put their hand up and say that didn't work. I think we're proud of that. We're trying. So farmers appreciate that, customers appreciate that we're giving it a go, and it'll work. It won't work. We'll keep moving forward, and we do it with a smile on our face. Sometimes, we get upset, but if you keep the end state in mind, science for healthier animals, we're going to get there. And it'll make a difference, and that's certainly something that this site in Bendigo and our global teams around the world certainly does encourage.
Excellent. Glenn, thank you for telling us a little bit of the MSD animal health story, and particularly its link to Central Victoria, which means that I've left Peter Faulkner, the Chief Executive Officer of Bendigo Health, till last in our trilogy today. Perhaps, again, encouraging innovation in health services. In Central Victoria at Bendigo Health, this is actually something you've really put your mind to, isn't it?
Yes, Jonathan, we have. It's something that we think is really important. Transformative change in its own right is just not enough without innovation. We think that innovation is essential. Health services are, in some respects, by their nature, quite innovative. Lots of medical advances and equipment and technological advances occur, but they're also very conservative places in their own right. And in many ways, they need to be conservative. We're, looking after people's lives and so forth. So you do have to be innovative with care, I think, is important. But from our point of view, we've, as I said earlier, we've stepped into a very digital environment in the new Bendigo Hospital. That presents us with both opportunity and interest, and we've been certainly optimistic about our capacity and ability to support innovation, and we're really keen to have been supported by the state to conduct the first regional health accelerator program.
So explain more. What does a health accelerator program do, Peter?
Yeah, well, the health, what we have with our accelerator program is a number of innovative startup companies and or businesses, and we've enrolled those businesses into the program. In the program, we provide a number of things for the businesses. We provide some mentorship with a panel of mentors. We provide some learning, business support, marketing, financial, taxation, those sorts of elements that a startup business will benefit from. But more importantly, we provide the health startup with, in a sense, a live laboratory. So we make available our clinical expertise and potentially the patient population of our hospital for the startups to trial, to test, and develop their products, their technologies, or their ideas as such. And so that's done in a very supportive kind of way.
Would that then short circuit in some ways, Peter, that idea of a startup company saying, we've got this brilliant idea, we believe it'll improve X by 10%, and then you take it to your practitioners and they say, but it's completely impractical. So that we avoid that kind of conversation, do we?
Yeah, absolutely. That's certainly part of it. Equally, some of the accelerators are in fact health practitioners themselves that have had great ideas but really know where to take them. And so it's been a little of a mix of both of those, outside and internal innovation and so forth. And we've been forced as an organisation to adapt and innovate ourselves. And the first thing we had to do, of course, was take an accelerator program to a virtual platform. Originally, the program was fully conceived as a in-house, face-to-face program, which, thanks to COVID, we very rapidly transitioned that to a virtual accelerator. But it hasn't, I don't believe, impeded the innovation or the commitment or the benefits that the program brings to the startups.
Now, public health system is always cash-strapped. Is it hard to justify to your accountants that having an accelerator program is a good thing to invest in, that it will bring you savings or innovations in the future?
Well, I think from our point of view, we were fortunate in gaining some government financial support to the program in the first instance, and our contribution has largely been the in-kind contribution. So we provide the accommodation, we provide the technological support, we provide the mentors and the kind of access to clinical and patient environments for the accelerators. So not too hard to convince the accountants on this one, but I do think that there is an appetite within the health industry generally for innovation. I think, my experience, my hair colour tells you I've been around for a little while, and my experience of the industry is that demand inevitably outstrips supply. And in those kinds of environments, you do have to get inventive. You do have to find smarter ways to do things. And we do have and have had very much the philosophy of working smarter, not harder, trying to find better ways to do things, safer ways to do things, and in many instances, more rapid ways to diagnose and treat.
Peter Faulkner, is it too early for me to ask you about any particular startup or idea that you see has potential that you've identified through this program?
Oh, there are some really interesting and novel startups in the program. There's certainly one that is very much a telehealth-based startup, and perhaps I'll talk a little further about telehealth later on and maybe mention that, but in that context. But one that's quite innovative and interesting is the kind of diagnostic toilet paper, which is a kind of great idea, which is toilet paper that is reactive to certain pathogens or substances like blood, for example. So rather than waiting for your annual bowel screen, if you're in that age bracket and looking for any blood that might be in your feces, the toilet paper can tell you in real time. So we reckon that's an interesting and tricky kind of innovation, just as we know even from the pandemic and public news reports, there's a lot of analysis around pathogens in sewage worldwide that's taking place. And that kind of gives rise to potential for innovations, diagnostic innovations through Internet of Things type technologies from just normal daily activities of using the toilet. We think that's pretty interesting and an exciting kind of technology.
It is, and I've been told reliably even the Queen is involved with that particular process. Peter, in some ways you've given me the segue that I was looking for because, for example, earlier in our showcase we spoke to Hazeldene's Poultry Farms in Bendigo. They were talking about an Internet 4.0 or Technology 4.0 project where Internet of Things can monitor the development of chickens. So I suppose that in that side, a lot of people are wearing wearable devices now that can be channeled into an IoT kind of project. Where do you think wearables are going to be taking us in areas like community health?
Yeah, look, it's a really interesting question, Jonathan. I mean, we know that organisations like Apple and Google have been, over the last couple of years, recruiting some of the strongest scientific minds in this regard. So there's no question that I think we will see the kind of commoditisation of diagnostics, of wearable diagnostics into the future. We're on the verge of it with the Apple Watch or the Fitbit and those sorts of products already. Really the question becomes, it's quite easy to capture data through the Internet of Things these days, and we are, for example, in the COVID context, what we know is that for people who are positive with COVID disease, that a proportion of them become very unwell, usually at around day 10 of the progress of the illness. And that decline can be extraordinarily rapid. And the best predictor of that decline is their level of oxygen saturation. And any of us can go to a chemist shop and buy a little device that you clip on your finger that'll give you your oxygen saturation levels. And you can monitor, if you've got COVID disease, your own wellness in that respect. But we've, as part of our response, we do have a number of Bluetooth-enabled saturation monitors, which we have made available to patients to monitor their progress at home. But as I say, you can capture a vast amount of data, but part of the issue is being able to monitor and then to respond. It's all well and good for us all to have some kind of wearable Internet of Thing device, and if it's telling some database somewhere that you are becoming very sick very quickly, it's another thing to have somebody be able to monitor that and then to respond to it. So, and that's something that we've been very careful about in our trial of these devices, is not just capturing the data, but then being able to use it and respond to it appropriately.
That's where innovative privacy and ethics groups come into the conversation, isn't it?
Yeah, that's very true. We do, and we know that health is one of those areas that is extremely data rich and sometimes information poor. And one of the things that we did as an organisation with the support of La Trobe University and the Department of Health and Human Services in 2019 was to run a datathon. And it was the biggest datathon that was conducted in Australia, and we combined 8 disparate data sets, health data sets, and linked them with a common linking ID, and enabled then data technologists and health researchers to come in and actually use the data, do some analytics on the data, and try and answer some research questions from that data. So as I say, it's easy to capture the data. It's another thing to do something with it. With wearables, you've got to be able to respond quickly, provide care and treatment appropriately. And with big data, you've got to be able to make it available to the people who have the questions to ask.
Extraordinary, extraordinary. And Peter Faulkner, I guess that we do have to mention it. You've touched on it a couple of times, COVID-19 coronavirus. Can I ask you about something that you mentioned before, telehealth, and in some ways what would have been quite difficult or at least slow to implement without the crisis has actually become almost a daily thing that we're all taking for granted. But how well has telehealth actually helped you continue services to your community?
From our point of view, Jonathan, we've been in the telehealth business as, I suppose, toe dipping for quite some time in a sort of quantum respect. We've had telehealth in psychiatry for many years, so virtual consults happening for many years. We've provided telehealth support in intensive care to smaller hospitals in the region. But what COVID has brought about has been a very rapid and significant change in the way we do business. We've taken more than 50% of our outpatient activity from face-to-face visits and converted that to telehealth consultations virtually overnight. Within a matter of weeks, we executed that change. We're a large organisation. We have over 500 of our staff working from home, and we're all pretty familiar, not always fans of, but pretty familiar with these sorts of technologies for meetings and the like. So that's been a bit of a transformative change for us, and certainly that support for patients at home who are unwell, being able to not only telephone in but Zoom in.
It's interesting. Again, earlier in this series, we heard about Foodmac in Echuca, who accelerated the production in a Shepparton plant of face masks from, I think, 2 million a year up to 16 or 160, a ridiculously large number of millions of face masks, and they did that in just 8 weeks. Would it be fair to say in health, never let a crisis go by without, creating some great innovation?
Yeah, no, that's very true. We've telehealth is just one of the things we've done. We've radically transformed our business internally to provide a highly safe and secure environment both for staff and for patients. So we have, in a sense, 2 hospitals within a hospital. We have a respiratory hospital and a non-respiratory hospital, for want of a better description. So we can keep any people who might be COVID suspects separate from those who are not. And that's been a key innovation. We've put in place a testing service that we've never had before. We've had to invent a way of doing that. We're now doing public health and contact tracing, something we've never done before. So we've had to innovate in a number of ways. And interestingly, that's really demanded of us a number of things, not just doing things differently, but also how we monitor, measure and report on what we do in ways that previously we just haven't. So we've had to be quite nimble in addressing those sorts of new challenges.
Absolutely. You'd have to be very innovative in the way that you measure success and continual improvement on brand new ideas as well.
Correct.
Okay, that's extraordinary. Our panel this afternoon, or today, as part of the Bendigo Bendigo Innovation and Invention Festival, is Peter Faulkner, Chief Executive of Bendigo Health, Peter McCarthy from AMC, and Glenn Morrison, Director of Business Systems and Process Improvement at MSD Animal Health. And had a couple of questions come through while we've been talking, so I hope you don't mind a few questions without notice. And Peter McCarthy, the first is about the second gold mining boom. What lessons do you think that we can apply to the second that we learnt from the first?
I think that we can't assume a gold price and say that something is viable or not viable, because of course we've seen in recent times gold price go up quite substantially, and some of the things that we talked about earlier, learning from failure, some of the things I've been involved with that weren't so successful would today be tremendously successful because of the gold price. So that's one lesson I think that I've learned.
So never assume that what the price of gold is today is what it'll be like in 3 years from now.
That's right, or any other commodity, because of course technologies are changing, and if you're producing metals that go into fuel cells or batteries or whatever it might be, the supply and demand situation is changing rapidly, and you need to really keep an eye on the potential rather than just where things are today.
So where, again, that idea of optimism versus innovation is that you'd have to be optimistic. For example, there's a future demand for gold as you explore and come into the second gold rush. And similarly, there must have been some people with great foresight and optimism when they saw that lithium, for example, was going to be an important component of electric batteries. So it sounds like do your homework is part of optimism and innovation as well.
Yes, and it keeps changing. In my role as a consultant, I worked on lithium projects, and at the time, and maybe 20 years ago, no one was very excited about them, and it was a product and it had its place, but nobody got very excited about it. And of course, that's all changed around now. So, as I say, don't assume.
For sure.
Keep the options open.
Keep your options open. And I suppose it will always be the reality that there will be successes and there will be people who, unfortunately, at the end of a project or failed project will have to wonder what they'll do better next time.
That's right. And in mining, because we can't see into the ground even today with our best technology, some of the projects just do not succeed. And failure is part of the process. Learn from it, move on, don't get too depressed about it. And enough of them are successful that make the whole experience worthwhile.
For sure. And Glenn, you've spoken about being very agile in identifying projects and what needs to be done to support animal health and domestic pet health into the future. Can you do a crystal ball for me and maybe think about what MSD would be like in 5 or 10 years from now?
I can have a try at it. Where MSD was 10 years ago or 19 years ago when I started to where it is today is very different. I'm expecting in 10 years' time it'll be different again. I think very much we've touched on it a little bit in relation to wearables. That's also relevant in animal health. The ability to track and monitor animals, their health, how they're treated, what vaccines, where they've been, what food lot is significant. Certainly, I think where we may be in 10 years' time is more around the health platforms. And certainly vaccines will always be a key element within our business. But I certainly see we're also looking for that value creation and where is the change in the industries working. Obviously, less human intervention, Obviously, we can automate as much as possible, even in our manufacturing space, to where the platforms and the products and the portfolio of service. I think in the past you'd have one vaccine. You can't just build a business around one or two or three key vaccines. It's about really what can we add across a broad range of animal health, whether it be pig, poultry, cattle, ruminant, cat, dog, fish. All those platforms are significant in their growth for protein within the human environment and also within our industry. So I think MSD will be very different in 10 years' time. I think it'll be a lot more platform-based and certainly a lot more partnerships in relation to where we can add value creation for our partners and our customers.
Sorry, you've thrown me the question I have to ask now. How do you vaccinate a fish?
Well, you can either do it by immersion therapy, so you can put the vaccine in the water, or you can actually, believe it or not, you actually hand inject or use a machine to inject the fish individually.
Wow. That's all. Sorry. Wow. And finally, I've got a question for all of you, and I might start with you, Glenn, since you're already warmed up, and that is, how optimistic are you for the future of your industry?
Look, I'm very optimistic in relation to, I think I'm spoiled within animal health. I think the world needs healthy animals for whether it be food production or companion animals or anything. I think there's a real drive for that. In the past, there's a real drive within our customer base that animals, they're key, they're partners. People spend more on them than they do on themselves in some instances. For us to keep providing that level of service is really critical. When I see the investment within animal health from our parent company, it's significant. There's a need out there within our organisation. So I'm very optimistic about what we do. I'm very optimistic around Bendigo and what the Bendigo site can do. The plans that we have in place for the years to come are significant, but as are other manufacturing plants within the region. So to me, I'm really excited at where we'll be, and I hope in 10 years' time I'm talking to you and I can answer the question again.
Well, that's good optimism as well. Peter Faulkner, let's maybe talk about Bendigo Hospital and how optimistic you are for that future, because when it was commissioned, it had to be ready for technologies of not just the 2010s, but of the 2040s and 2050s as well. So how optimistic are you that the hospital and the services it provides will continue to be able to be state-of-the-art for the lifetime of the hospital?
Jonathan, I'm very optimistic. I have to be optimistic. I was born optimistic, but if I look back in history, of course, the Bendigo Hospital commenced more than 160 years ago as the Diggers Hospital. So our history is intrinsically linked to the mining history of Bendigo, and I think both industries have bright futures ahead. Clearly, from our point of view, we are, health services are intrinsic to our society and our culture. We're a very large employer in Bendigo, where we employ a good proportion of our population. They come here every day and do very good things for our community. So it's hard not to be optimistic. I think technologically, the strength will really come from partnerships, not only partnerships with technology and others, but partnerships with our community more broadly. We think that's where the strength really lies for us in future.
Well, humans are the ones who are ingenious, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And Peter Faulkner, I suppose in some ways we've got a lovely chronology. You're involved with Sovereign Hill Museum, which is a mining village from the 1850s. In Bendigo we see Central Deborah Gold Mine, which tells the story of mining up to the 1950s. I wonder what will be in a mining museum for Bendigo in another 50 years from now?
I think there'll be a lot of computers and very interesting machines. There's an old saying that everything that we use in our daily lives either is farmed or it's mined, which means animal health and agronomy on the one hand and mining on the other hand. And to continue to innovate, we need to be right at the forefront of computer technology and all of those things. So it's a very exciting field to be working in. And I think that will continue, and obviously mining has to continue and has to continue to provide the needs of society. So I think we've got a great future.
And that's a terrific way to finish, that innovation, optimism and invention will continue to be important ingredients in an optimistic future. Thank you very much for joining us today. Peter McCarthy from AMC, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Jonathan.
To Peter Faulkner from Bendigo Health, thank you very much.
Welcome.
And to Glenn Morrison from MSD Animal Health, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Well, this has been the final in our series showcasing innovation in Greater Bendigo. I trust you've learned lots about the exciting future of advanced manufacturing in our region. And if you missed any of the sessions in this series, you can catch up and watch the recordings on the BIIF app. And on behalf of the 2020 Bendigo Invention and Innovation team, thank you and goodbye.